Welcome to the Extraordinary Vets podcast, where we believe that every career tells a story. I'm your host, Donna Harris. I'm a veterinarian at Michigan State University and a futurist. My mission is to tell the stories of those creating the future of our profession. We always enjoy the opportunity to highlight veterinary career paths that many of us aren't exposed to, and today's guest is a perfect example. I'm especially excited to welcome someone joining us here in person, Dr. Myron Kebus, a specialist in fish production medicine. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Donna, for having me.
So let's start by educating us on aquaculture and fish farming. Can you help us visualize what a modern fish farm looks like? And how does that industry operate on a practical level?
Well, it's a very interesting industry because it's very diverse. And I work primarily in the north central region of the United States, from Michigan to the Dakotas, Missouri, and over to Ohio, and all states included. And in this region, we have fish farms that are raising fish for food, such as rainbow trout, yellow perch, tilapia. We have baitfish farmers who are producing baitfish for all the anglers in the Great Lakes region. And we have people raising fish for other purposes, such as aquaponics, where there's a combination of raising fish with plants such as lettuce and greens that are sold in grocery stores. So it's very diverse, and it ranges from very small farms to rather large farms. Worldwide, it's even more expansive in that we have aquaculture or fish farming in the oceans. We have it inland, and in much of the rest of the world, it is a even more important source of food for people.
So I started out by asking you about aquaculture and fish farming. Can I use those terms interchangeably?
We use them interchangeably. There are different aspects of aquaculture, and in our region, we're primarily talking about finfish aquaculture. That is the raising of what most of us would recognize as fish, those with fins. There is also shellfish culture. There's culture of shrimp, much of that being done in ponds in different parts of the world. And there's also very important and very large production of algae for human consumption and for other purposes.
So the farms that you work on are the fish production farms, are these indoor places like with tanks, or are they outdoors in ponds?
Great question. It varies. Traditionally, fish farming in this region has been in outdoor earthen ponds that have either been excavated or at one point were natural. Most of them are man-made. And the source of the water might be from well water or spring or diverted water from a stream. In terms of trout production relies on a lot of cold, clear groundwater, and those trout are in what we call raceways. They're long tanks that are shallow and have water entering on one end and flowing through and out the other, in many ways simulating a stream. Most recently, say in the past few decades, there's been more of a move to indoor production in terms of recirculating aquaculture. And here we have the systems which use filtration in terms of mechanical filtration, removing the solids from the fish tanks, biological filtration, handling the nitrogenous waste, chemical filtration in terms of removing some of the smaller chemicals that are produced. And there's a whole range, and there are some farms that are raising some of their fish indoors and some of their fish outdoors, and there's others that are exclusively indoors and others that are exclusively outdoors.
It sounds like the facility is trying to mimic where they would be naturally, which sounds like a healthy environment.
That's a great observation, Donna, in that, and as veterinarians, we're working with the producers to first recognize the species that we're working with and their biological requirements and how that affects the health of those fish. For example, trout require colder water in the range of 50 degrees Fahrenheit, while tilapia, another food fish, prefers temperatures closer to 80 to 85 degrees. So one of the basic things is meeting the environmental requirements of these fish, particularly the water quality requirements, beginning with temperature and also pH, ammonia levels, nitrate, and as veterinarians, and that's one of the things that I've worked on, is training veterinarians to not only become skilled in necropsy techniques and the diagnostic techniques that we learn in veterinary school, but also those that we don't, which are related to analysis of water chemistry.
Sure. I think I'd be a tilapia because I got to have some warm temperature if I'm in a pool or a pond. I'm definitely a tilapia. Or anything going higher, like a 90 degree, I think that's what I would be for sure. So where does a veterinarian fit in this system? You talked about veterinarians knowing water quality as well as diseases and things like that. Are you typically called in by the person who owns the fish farm, or are you called in by the companies that are buying the fish to make sure they're healthy? What's your role as a specialist in fish farming?
In our region, our farms are small to medium. There are a few larger farms. And those farms will call veterinarians. And they'll call veterinarians when they're having fish disease problems. They'll call veterinarians to help with issues related to troubleshooting, health problems on the farm. Most commonly, they'll call veterinarians to provide the service of conducting a fish health inspection and then an associated issuance of a fish health certificate. Fish movements are regulated in this region and in the country and in the world, and much of that relies on the efforts of veterinarians who conduct inspections on farms, submit samples to diagnostic labs, receive reports of the status of pathogens, and then issue a certificate that gives a declaration of the current status, which allows the farms to move from one state to another or to one country to another.
Well, that's interesting. And that, we do have some listeners that aren't veterinarians, but just interested. So you're describing these fish farms, and the veterinarian has a role in there to kind of figure out if that farm is healthy and help them if it's not. But who regulates all that in the U.S.? Like, if I'm a consumer and I want to buy fish from a responsible fish farm, is there any way for me to do that, to know that, okay, veterinarian, you talked about certification. Who's doing that? How would I know that?
Donna, you've asked one of the most complicated questions so far.
Oh, great.
And here, what I'll say is that in the U.S., there are many different agencies that regulate fish farming on one level. And there are many agencies that veterinarians need to be aware of when they're practicing aquaculture veterinary medicine. From the standpoint of movement of fish, requirements for moving from one state to another are determined by the receiving states. What makes it even more complicated is, unlike the other animals we work with in veterinary medicine, livestock and poultry, in fish, the agency may be the Board of Animal Health, the state Department of Agriculture, but in many cases it's not. It is the Department of Natural Resources or equivalent. And there we have a situation that there's not always going to be the state veterinarian involved in these requirements that are promulgated and required for movement. One of the challenges aquaculture veterinarians have in the U.S. is providing to their clients the assistance on figuring out what are the requirements that the states are going to. In many cases, when fish farmers are pursuing a health certificate, they're doing so because they're going to be shipping to a number of different states. And each state, it's fair to say, has different requirements in terms of the list of pathogens that are required. So the aquaculture veterinarian is challenged to collect and submit the samples in order for the full panel of pathogens to be tested that will meet the requirements not only for state A, but also state B, C, and perhaps D.
That's crazy.
In terms of regulation of drugs, we have the same situation with the Food and Drug Administration as we do with our other animals. In terms of food inspection, that's done on the federal level. And if we're moving fish from the United States to Canada and other countries, that's where our federal agencies are involved.
So there's an export market for fish too.
There is an export market for fish, and in many cases, the export market is live fish.
Oh.
Should say, we are a country that has a tremendous deficit when it comes to imports regarding seafood. After petroleum, it's one of the highest contributors to trade deficits. What I mean is, we import much more than we produce.
So if our listeners want to support U.S. industry, they should look for fish that was farmed in the U.S.
Yes, and there, the sort of species that are raised are channel catfish in the southern states, particularly the state of Mississippi, rainbow trout, which are produced in our region, and also to a great extent out west in Idaho and out east in North Carolina and other states.
My dad was a big rainbow trout fisherman in Kentucky.
Oh.
I loved going down there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was big into that. So let's shift gears and talk about your journey. When did you first decide to pursue veterinary medicine? Were you one of those kids that always wanted to be a veterinarian? Did you see that as your career path?
My interest in fish at a young age was partly inspired by my father. And he came from Ukraine. And at a young age, he explained to me about fish farms in Western Ukraine and how fish were raised in ponds. And there, the primary species were carp and northern pike. And this sounded very interesting and fascinating to me. My mom also came from a farm background in southern Germany. But here I was growing up in Detroit. And so I had these different interests that I was hoping to put together. I had this idea of melding veterinary medicine and my interest in fish farming. And before veterinary school, I had a great opportunity, and I worked with the University of Wisconsin Madison aquaculture program. And there, I got my hands wet, raising yellow perch, walleye for research purposes, and learning a lot of the things that fish farmers know about feeding, handling, and other aspects of raising fish. Then I entered into my veterinary career, but I also did a master's in which I did research on stress in rainbow trout. When I was in veterinary school, when I was first admittedly, there were faculty members that were very suspicious that I may not end up being what I thought I would in terms of it. But there was one veterinarian in the faculty, Dr. Michael Collins, who to this day remains a very close friend and colleague. And he had a similar interest years prior. And he did work with channel catfish when he was doing a PhD in Georgia. And he encouraged me to pursue this. He also encouraged me to attend the AquaVet program, which to this day remains a great opportunity for veterinary students to get exposed to aquatic veterinary medicine. At that time, it was held in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. And there I met other students from around the country who to this day remain friends and colleagues. I saw there that there were opportunities and there were veterinarians working in different aspects of aquatic veterinary medicine. In my senior year, I was provided the opportunity to do externships. I went to Maine and worked with Dr. Hugh Mitchell, who was a veterinarian for salmon farm in Eastport, Maine. I went to Mississippi and worked with Dr. Michael Johnson on catfish diagnostics. And I went to British Columbia and worked with Dr. Michael Kent on salmon diseases, and went with veterinarians out to salmon farm net pen sites. So I had some basis when I graduated of there were possibilities. But before I did that, I wanted to see, and I wanted to develop some clinical experience. So when I graduated, I started by doing mixed animal practice. Dairy calls in the morning, small animal in the afternoon. And I did that for 1 year. And after that, I did something that hadn't been done to that point, and that was I hung up my shingle as the first veterinarian to provide private practice service to fish clients in the north central region. I started out, because my interest was primarily with fish farms, by getting a list of fish farms from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I put it on my lap, and as I drove in my small Toyota pickup truck, pull up in the driveway, and would be greeted by fish farmers who would say, "Who are you?" And my answer was, "I'm Dr. Myron Kebus. I'm a fish veterinarian." And they'd say, "What the heck is that?" So the initial efforts were really a combination of veterinary medicine, marketing, efforts to educate the fish farm community and also the veterinary community that veterinary medicine had a place in fish farms. And there I started working with fish farms who wanted to work with me. In fact, my first major clients came to me because they identified that there were issues that a veterinarian could help them with on their farms to reduce the mortalities, reduce morbidity, increase the survival of their fish, and in many cases, improve their profitability.
That must have been gratifying to go from people not knowing or clients not knowing what a fish veterinarian does to them reaching out then and saying, oh, I see some benefits. That must have been a gratifying move.
Oh, it was. It was exciting too. And it was interesting in that I was kind of going against the current because in many ways, the thinking was, this might not work out. But in the end, it started to expand, and I started working in other states, including Michigan, Minnesota, and others. And I did this for roughly 8 years. And then a position opened up in the Wisconsin Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection. They had just recently received authority to develop a program to regulate fish farms, and they needed a veterinarian in the Division of Animal Health. And so they contacted me, and I was the first veterinarian to start that program. When I was hired, the state veterinarian said, uh-oh, what are we going to do now? You're the only one that's really doing the fish health inspections and this fish farm work. I said, well, I see it that we have maybe two options. One is you fund me to go to all these farms and try to do it myself. Well, I had already been doing that in my practice. And one of the things that I encountered was the challenges of the distances between farms. Mm-hmm. And so from an economic standpoint, and also a practical standpoint, and thinking of the farmers and veterinarians, I said, I've got an idea. Let's try something different. How about if I try training veterinarians who are throughout the state, who will be scattered around the state and closer to the producers. And I will assist the veterinarians, and I will assist the fish farms in this. This was the first time that this approach was attempted. And again, I was stepping into an area of uncertainty, and perhaps that's kind of a theme for my career.
Sounds like it. And I think I remember this. I think I remember when Wisconsin started some sort of certificate program for veterinarians to get an education in fish production. I don't remember the year, but I think I remember when that came out.
I was hired in 1999, and immediately I started exploring what were the possibilities of bringing private practice veterinarians to fish farms. I sent out a letter to all the veterinarians in the state of Wisconsin, inviting them to a series of 3 talks I would do throughout the state to introduce veterinarians to what fish farms are, what they're looking for, what species they're raising, how veterinary services fits in. At that time, as I recall, there were perhaps 2,500, perhaps 3,000 veterinarians, and close to 80 responded with interest, which was very encouraging. The veterinarians attended the workshops, and it was clear that there was interest among veterinarians to provide that service. The next series I did was I sent out a letter to all the fish farmers, said, hey, I've got some veterinarians who are interested in working with you. At these meetings, can we all meet together so that the veterinarians can hear what you're looking for in terms of veterinary services and what your economics are and what are your the parameters that will determine how these services will be provided. And we did that. And from that, we had a core of veterinarians who were interested. And they said, great. But as veterinarians do, they said, but I don't want to step out onto the farm without knowing what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. So they provided me the next step that I had to work on, which was to begin training veterinarians. So there I begun by calling fish farmers that I had worked with and saying, can I bring some veterinarians to your farm? And are you willing to donate some fish? And we'll do some necropsies, and I'll train them on how to conduct a necropsy, how to conduct skin scrape, wet gill mounts, use a light microscope on the farm. And then I did a series of on-farm workshops on how to test water quality, dissolved oxygen, ammonia, alkalinity, all the important parameters. And with that, the veterinarians began to develop confidence, and the fish farmers began to develop confidence that there was a program that would support the veterinarians and raise their core competencies, if you will, or their ability to provide valuable services.
Is that program still going on? Do they still have the certificate?
So after the initial effort in Wisconsin, other states saw what we were doing and said, hey, can you come to Minnesota? Oh. So I went to Minnesota.
Nice.
And then when I was called by South Dakota to travel there in February to do training for veterinarians, I thought, this is great, but perhaps there's another way to do this. And when I returned, I was looking over the shoulder of a colleague in the department, and I saw that she was looking at a training program for veterinarians on Johne's disease and how, as a veterinarian, to walk onto a farm and evaluate that. And I said, that looks very interesting. Who developed that? And she said, oh, Dr. Michael Collins. I said, Mike. I got on the phone. I called my mentor, friend, said, Mike, can we do one of these for fish? He said, sure, Myron, you just need to find the funding. And fortunately, I had returned from Mississippi, and there were some opportunities for funding. We were able to get the funding, and we developed a program, 5 modules to train veterinarians and veterinary students that to this day is still available. It's available through the American Association of Fish Veterinarian website. And the modules include the first one, an introduction to aquaculture, the second one on water quality and what you need to know, third one on managing stress and handling. The fourth one is on how to conduct a fish health inspection, which is something that veterinarians are asked frequently. And the fourth one was how to do a modified fish health assessment, which is a technique that I developed that is a production medicine tool, if you will, for veterinarians to evaluate the health of fish and be able to engage in a discussion with producers on how to improve health. So to this day, opportunities in Wisconsin and beyond exist for veterinarians to get additional training to prepare them for aquaculture veterinary medicine.
So you played a key role in a couple organizations in founding the aquatic or fish veterinary group, but also there's a specialty now through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners for fish practice. How many specialists do we have now? Is that an approved specialty or still pending?
15 years ago, two colleagues and I made the effort to establish the American Association of Fish Veterinarians. One of the initial goals was to eventually develop a fish board certification. We now have board certification for fish practitioners. A number of us in the American Association of Fish Veterinarians were involved in developing the criteria and submitting it to be accepted. It's now accepted. I was involved in writing the initial questions for the aquaculture portion of the exam, and now we have veterinarians who are annually taking the required examination and presenting the requirements in terms of practice and publications in order to get that status.
That's a major accomplishment, getting that specialty.
It is, and I give credit most to my colleagues, and two in particular, Dr. Roy Yanong, who is a longtime colleague that I met in Aquavet before I graduated from veterinary school, and Dr. Johnny Shelley, who is taken the charge of really leading the effort to continue this process and very instrumental in making it happen.
I've always said that veterinary medicine is a very small world, but the veterinary medicine within fish veterinarians, even if that's not 100% of your focus, must be even smaller. You all must know each other and help each other.
We do, and it's interesting. It's particularly interesting when veterinary students come to us and ask, what is it like, and one of the things that we can say quite honestly is that fish veterinarians are very fun, welcoming, and generous in terms of mentoring segment of veterinary medicine.
I could not agree more. I've sent a couple students to different people and said, this person's interested in fish, and they just take them and absorb them and off they go. I have to ask this question though. When you have a meeting, do you just have fish at your meals?
No, we're usually having something else because we're so tired of fish. We need a break.
I love it. I always wondered that with my husband, who's a swine veterinarian. I said, do you just have pork chops at all your meetings? He's like, yeah, pretty much. So, all right, well, let's shift gears just a little bit because I want to ask you about the type of cases. Can you walk us through like a memorable or a challenging case you might have had in your practice?
I have many cases that I'd love to share, and cases that I encountered when I first started, and cases that have just been presented to me in the recent weeks. The first case occurred about 1.5 years ago. Dr. Nora Hickey from the Washington Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory and I were at a fish farm in southern Wisconsin. I had invited her to teach with me the week-long fish selective that I teach at the School of Veterinary Medicine. We went to this commercial trout farm, and in the process of visiting the farm, my approach is to have students not just tour the farm, but have the farmer present problems to the students and guide them through how to go about finding a diagnosis. And there was a pond in which there were very obvious signs of white patches on about 5% of 5-month-old rainbow trout.
White patches on their skin, on their
White
scales?
patches on the back, on the skin, and looking from the edge of the raceway, it was hard to determine what that was. But of course, the fish farmer asked, as they always do, "What is it, Doc?" And so there, we were able to kind of engage the veterinary students in some thought. What could it be? Well, it could be sunburn. Believe it or not, fish, particularly trout, can get sunburn. Or it could be injuries due to predators that have not fully healed. Or it could be some other conditions. And here was a great teaching opportunity for the students in that we use the tools of veterinary medicine and our colleagues in veterinary diagnostic laboratories to help us. So we collected a subsample of fish from this group. We euthanized them, did a thorough necropsy examination, and collected tissues of abnormal portions of these affected fish and normal portions, submitted it to Washington Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory for histopathology. And the finding was steatitis, inflammation of the fat. And here we loop back to the farm in terms of the feed, and it fit in with the history in that the producer admitted that the feed was old as far as feed goes, at 12 months of age. And the farm had noticed a curious smell. Steatitis is associated with rancidity of feed and rancidity of fat. The producer took what we provided, stopped feeding that feed, got new feed, fresh feed, and then asked me to return 3.5 weeks later for us to examine the progress of those fish. Remarkably, we had a hard time finding any fish that had white patches. We collected some of the fish and we looked at them, and the skin had already healed over, and you could see the imperfections on how it had healed, that those fish may have been previously affected. But the recovery was quite remarkable. So this was an interesting situation where infectious disease might have been the first thing we thought about, but it was actually a nutritional disease.
So how does the inflammation of the fat, which is in the body, show signs outside the scales on a fish?
So the inflammation in the fat, and the fat is just below the skin,
Okay.
leads to changes in the skin architecture, the muscle. What was so remarkable was on histopathology, the extent of the damage to the muscle went all the way down to the vertebra. But remarkably, as we followed these fish all the way to market, they healed remarkably well once they were on good feed.
And healthy to eat in the market.
Healthy to eat too.
So no,
Yeah.
completely healed.
Yeah.
So interesting.
In my current position as the aquaculture outreach veterinarian for the North Central region, I've made myself available to producers throughout the region to call when they have problems and to coach them through solving problems on their fish farms. A fish farm from Indiana called regarding problems with tilapia. first thing I said was, let's work with your veterinarian, your local veterinarian. And this particular farm has a veterinarian that they work with. So there, the farmer's team was expanded. The tilapia were showing signs of skin ulcers and chronic level of mortality, continuous mortalities. So we talked about submitting samples to a diagnostic laboratory for bacteriology testing, virology testing, histopathology. Interestingly, this is one of the more challenging cases that we've worked on recently. And the first lab that we worked with was able to provide excellent information. But still, we weren't able to find a definitive diagnosis. So the next step was for me to consider my colleagues in the area of fish medicine who have experience with tilapia, and there brought them in. And now we're working on this case, and we're encouraged that we will find some workable solution for this farm. And in this case, one of the options that we're looking at is vaccination for bacterial pathogens. And that's one of the projects I'm working on currently. Received funding for a grant from USDA and doing a series of training efforts with fish farmers and with veterinarians on the use of vaccination on fish farms in this region. And we're going to be conducting also hands-on workshops for veterinarians and for fish farmers next year.
Boy, that'll be novel. That is a really novel idea.
Yeah.
How do you vaccinate a large quantity of fish in a pond or in a tank?
That's a great question, Donna. And vaccination has been a tool veterinarians have used for a number of years. And there are three basic options. One is actually injectable. Injecting into the coelomic cavity, or the equivalent to the peritoneum. And there, it's done by hand. There are crews that do this. They can do as many as 30,000 fish a day. It is very labor intensive, and it's becoming more a technique that is used on a smaller number of fish of particularly higher value, such as broodstock. Another option is incorporating it into the feed or top coating it onto the feed. This technique is being explored and used more. The challenge, as you can imagine, is that the vaccine is exposed to all the mechanisms in the digestive tract that are attempting to break it down. And there are some techniques that have been developed by companies to hinder that process and allow the vaccine to enter the bloodstream and successfully immunize the fish. But perhaps the most common way that fish are vaccinated is through immersion. That is, creating a solution which includes the vaccine of water and then transferring fish, usually young, smaller fish, for a set amount of time and then transferred back. And in this case, the vaccine is absorbed into the fish. And this is becoming the most common, particularly in the area of autogenous vaccines. And with autogenous vaccines, as many listeners know, are vaccines that are developed by first identifying the specific pathogen on that farm, then identifying that bacteria and producing a vaccine from that, and that vaccine being used only on that farm. And that's a process in which veterinarians are involved in. By the way, Michigan State University, Dr. Thomas Locke and his lab have been very instrumental in advancing that technique for rainbow trout.
Always good to give a shout out to a Spartan. Dr. Kebus, thank you for coming in. I'm always excited to have an in-person guest and to learn about an aspect of the profession that is so unique. This podcast will be encouraging to veterinarians who are thinking about this pathway.
Well, thanks, Donna, for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate your interest in this area that I've devoted my career to and has really made veterinary medicine very rewarding for me and many of my colleagues.
Thank you for listening to Extraordinary Vets, where every career tells a story.